Alright, it's just a hopefully quick video on realism versus anti-realism. So, in virtually every case, I'm an anti-realist. There's one sort of partial exception where I do think that when it comes to philosophy of quantum mechanics, that Bohmian mechanics has been unfairly sort of ignored. I do think it's gotten the short end of the stick as far as consideration, but and that's a realist interpretation of quantum mechanics in the sense that they believe that the wave the wave function is has some physical corollary, and that it's not just something that's sort of left over from the math. But anyway, so specifically, I was reading a little bit about Wittgenstein's beliefs, and in that conversation, or in that content, there's a discussion over whether or not Wittgenstein was a realist or anti-realist, and that just reminded me of a bunch of one point that I wanted to make as far as my my position on all that. So, with regard to most debates in philosophy over realism versus anti-realism, it seems like people have a hard time stating what the difference is in the world. Like, what's the difference between a world where realism is true and one where anti-realism is true? And I mostly have scientific realism in mind here. So, how is it that our mathematical equations in physics, for example, why do they work so well in some ill-defined intuitive sense? But anyway, the idea I wanted to communicate was, yeah, it seems like they don't do a good job of drawing that distinction, realist or anti-realist. So over the question of, are we carving reality at its joints, where realists believe in these joints, there's a correct way to carve up reality physically. The only way I can think of where that would make sense is a case where there is some sort of mind. Maybe it's a god. Maybe or theoretically could be, say, some highly technologically sophisticated species that created our universe. Whether our universe is physical or virtual or mental or something else, I think is hard to is very hard to say. I don't think we know one way or the other, and I'm not sure that it's possible to tell from within a universe what the nature of it is. If you're outside that universe, then you either have software, you have a physical thing, and sometimes I doubt that there's a fact of the matter unless there is something outside of our universe. But I don't know, maybe, yeah, but it's hard to say. But anyway, the specific thing I wanted to convey in this video was the one way in which it seems to me that there is a not well-defined exactly, but a potentially well-defined, a well-definable distinction between realism and anti-realism is a case where some sort of mind created our universe, and then if we start carving up our world and start thinking of the constituents of this universe in the same way that this being thought of our universe when creating it, then if we're creating, then if we're carving reality according to, again, in the same way that that this being thinks of reality being constituted, then that's the only well-defined notion of realism that I can think of. The rest of the time, I don't know what people mean when they say that we're correctly carving up reality. Correctly thinking of chemistry as a thing that truly exists, as opposed to only, say, fundamental particles really existing and everything else being sort of abstractions created by humans upon that. But so anyway, so yeah, I mean, you can imagine that if the mind that created our universe, thought of the individual pieces that were being created, and I mean, if you think of this mathematically, then again, our equations of physics, why do they work? Well, because we sort of discovered, in some sense, the correct equations. That is, the equations that are used to determine what physically happens in this universe. If it's that same equation that we have come up with, and because we're talking about math, we should be able to say pretty precisely what we mean by the same. Perhaps we could define an isomorphism between the math that we've realized accurately describes some part of physical reality. Maybe we're thinking of physical theories, say, general relativity or something. maybe we can show there's an isomorphism. If we had this representation of the way God thinks about the universe or whatever. I'm not religious at all, but that's one way that you can think of this notion of realism, which is kind of interesting because Einstein talks about reading the mind of God when doing physics, and I think that's a good way to think about it. Trying to think if there's anything else I wanted to say about that. Okay, yeah. So mathematically, if our equations match God's equations that were used to govern this universe by design, then that's one notion. So I'm working on a philosophical methodology called executable philosophy, where we do philosophy in a programming language. Right now I'm using Python. I think Haskell and dialects of Lisp would also be fine choices. But yeah, doing philosophy in a programming language instead of in a natural language, it gives us various advantages. All the terms are defined. All the terms are well defined. You can't have weasel words. But anyway, you can imagine. I mean, suppose we're in a virtual world, and there's one or more computer programmers that designed this universe. Well, then, using executable philosophy, assuming that Python is sufficiently similar in some sense to the programming language used to create this universe, then I mean, if they're doing object-oriented programming, then it would be possible for us to create, say, a Python class with certain attributes and even certain methods. But that's, I guess, more complicated. If we have certain objects in this world are defined to have certain attributes, and they were defined that way in Python, then we should be able to, or a language similar to it, which, I mean, I suppose that would be a total miracle, but suppose that's the case. Well, then, when we do executable philosophy, and if you try to do, say, physics in software, and you try to describe physical reality using these classes, then there is this other possible sense in which what we say about physical reality and the way that we carve it up, there's a sense in which that could be correct. Again, if there's, say, an isomorphism between the Python classes we define to talk about this universe, if those same or very similar classes were defined by the creature or creatures that have programmed this universe, then yeah, that's a well-defined or potentially well-defined and I think totally coherent version of or a sense in which realism could be true. But if there isn't this other reality for our equations or our programs to correspond to in some way. And again, I keep thinking that isomorphisms might be the key to talking about the, this correspondence, or high degree of similarity between these pairs of things, our equations and the equations used to govern our laws of physics, and this other pair of our programs and the software, the source code really that was written to implement our universe. Implement our universe. I have not heard that phrase before. Anyway, so there's two notions of scientific realism that I think are coherent, and I should, if anybody watching this happens to know if there's a lot of literature on this, or there's definitely not literature on this, I'd be interested to find out. I write dramatically more philosophy than I read, so sometimes I lose track, or never really had track of what other people have done. But yeah, thanks for watching.